Hello Internet! After drinking all that aviation gin that Deadpool gave me, and throwing up everywhere at the end of my review of X-Men Origins Wolverine, and dealing with a massive hangover, I'm doing a whole lot better. In fact, I'm well enough to continue my reviews of the X-Men movies leading up to Deadpool and Wolverine. So now, we made it up to a prequel to the original X-Men trilogy of films, and a breath of fresh alcohol-free air after the disaster known as X-Men Origins Wolverine. X-Men First Class. Released on June 3rd, 2011, and directed by Matthew Vaughn. X-Men First Class is a prequel to the original X-Men trilogy of films. At the time of its release, it was originally intended to be a reboot of the series, and contradicted the events of the previous films, but thanks to Days of Future Past, it was retconned into a prequel to the original X-Men trilogy of films. This takes place in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis, as we focus on younger versions of a good majority of the original X-Men cast. We have James McAvoy as Charles Xavier, Michael Fassbender as Art Glencher, who would eventually become Magneto, and Nicholas Hoult as Hank McCoy, or Beast. I'm personally not a fan of First Class's design for Beast, but eventually, he got a redesign in X-Men Days of Future Past. That's what I call the Paramount Sonic effect, where the original design was hideous and horrifying, but it went through a major makeover to make it more accurate to the original IP's depiction of the character. We also have Katniss Everdeen herself, Jennifer Lawrence as Raven Darkholme, or Mystique. Now my question is, if Mystique is a little girl at the beginning of this movie, and is played by Jennifer Lawrence in a movie that takes place in 1962, how old is Rebecca Romijn's portrayal of Mystique in the original X-Men trilogy? Shouldn't she be an old lady alongside Ian McKellen? I mean, at the time the original X-Men trilogy came out, Rebecca Romijn was 27 years old, and each of the X-Men prequels take place 10 years apart. In Days of Future Past, takes place in the 70s, in X-Men Apocalypse, it's the 80s, and in Dark Phoenix, it's the 90s. When it comes time for me to review Dark Phoenix, I have a lot to say about the time period and all its plot holes. The main antagonist that the X-Men have to go up against in this movie is Sebastian Shaw, played by Kevin Bacon. Kevin Bacon would then be abducted by Drax and Mantis in the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special. Kevin Bacon's character in this movie is a former mutant Nazi scientist, and he's the leader of the Hellfire Club. Not the same one from Stranger Things, mind you. The Hellfire Club in this movie is a secret society bent on taking over the world. The Hellfire Club consists of Emma Frost, played by January Jones. Emma Frost is a telepath who can also turn her body into hard diamond form, which blocks out Charles' telepathic abilities. We also have Azazel, not Azazel from the Laurel and Sonic series, mind you. Shout out to Sonic Dragon Girl 23. Azazel is played by Jason Fleming, and has the ability to teleport, and his appearance is identical to that of the Devil. We have Alex Gonzalez as Riptide, a mutant who can create powerful whirlwinds. Well, I'll be damned! It appears that we have an airbender among us who is not the Avatar. And then we have Angel Salvador, played by Catwoman herself, Zoe Kravitz. Zoe Kravitz is the daughter of musician Lenny Kravitz, who portrayed Cinna in The Hunger Games. And we also have the first mutants to form the X-Men before we got Cyclops, Storm, Jean, and so on. We have Scott Summers' older brother Alex, played by Lucas Till. Alex goes by the codename Havoc, and his mutant ability is to absorb energy and discharge it as blasts. Lucas Till would return to the role in X-Men Days of Future Past and X-Men Apocalypse. There's Caleb Landry Jones as Banshee, a mutant with the ability to emit sonic screams, sonic blasts, sonic bursts, and sonic waves. And like I said in my review of Spider-Man 3, I can't say the word sonic to describe sound waves without thinking of Sonic the Hedgehog, my favorite character in all fiction. And then there's Moira McTaggart, played by Rose Byrne. This version of the character is not Scottish, not unlike the original X-Men cartoon in X-Men 97. This character first appeared in X-Men The Last Stand as a nurse, but in X-Men First Class and X-Men Apocalypse, she's an American CIA agent who becomes an ally to Charles Xavier. This video will contain spoilers to X-Men First Class, so if you have not seen X-Men First Class, please check it out for yourself after you're done putting your DVD and Blu-ray copies of X-Men Origins Wolverine into either a trash compactor, a bonfire, or inside your toilet bowl after eating a queso looper from Taco Bell.
The new quesalupa from Taco Bell. Get it with chicken, get it with steak, but with the cheese baked right in the shell. It's the next big thing. Go now while supplies last.
Regardless of how you dispose of your DVD or Blu-ray copies of X-Men Origins Wolverine, here's my thoughts on X-Men First Class. The movie opens up with the exact same scene that kicked off the first X-Men movie in 2000 with a young Eric Glencher at Auschwitz during the Holocaust, being taken away from his parents, and his mutant powers unleashing for the very first time. His bending of the metal gates is witnessed by Kevin Bacon, who runs a series of tests on Eric involving moving a coin with his mutant powers while pointing a gun at his mother's head. When he fails to move the coin, Kevin Bacon shoots his mother dead, and in Eric's rage, his powers unleash, and he kills 2 guards and demolishes the room, much to Kevin Bacon's delight. In New York, the same year, a young Charles Xavier notices something suspicious about his mother when he finds her in the kitchen late at night. When he notices that something is wrong, he looks into the imposter's mind and tells her telepathically that she's not his mother. And then, we see a young Raven Darkhold, who is surprised that Charles is not scared of her. Instead, he's delighted because he's not the only mutant in the world. He immediately invites her to live with him in his mansion, which would eventually become Xavier's school for gifted youngsters. 18 years later, in 1962, it is the middle of the Cold War, and the world is on edge because of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Around this time, John F. Kennedy is still president, and he is seen through archive footage all throughout the movie. Eventually, in Days of Future Past, Eric is framed for assassinating Kennedy when he was trying to stop it from happening. We all know what really happened, so I don't want to go into any further details. Eric, played by Michael Fassbender, is tracking down Kevin Bacon and wanting revenge for the death of his mother. He forces a beggar to trace a bar of Nazi gold to Kevin Bacon's address in Argentina, while using his mutant powers to pull out a filling from his mouth. He then finds former German soldiers at a bar in Argentina and kills them as he learns that Kevin Bacon has a yacht in Florida. Cut to England, where Charles, played by James McAvoy, earns his doctorate at Oxford University. There's something that Raven says quite a lot in this movie: mutant and proud. That means that one is not ashamed of being a mutant, unlike Anna Paquin's take on Rogue in the original X-Men trilogy. Now, the animated version of Rogue would say that, but not Anna Paquin's Rogue. Meanwhile, in Las Vegas, Moira McTaggart is following a U.S. Army officer into the Hellfire Club. Again, not from Stranger Things. There, she finds Kevin Bacon and his goons. The officer is then teleported into the war room, saying that the U.S. needs to install missiles in Turkey. The officer then meets Kevin Bacon at his yacht, where he would kill him. Kevin Bacon's mutant ability is absorbing and redirecting kinetic and radiated energy. I know his character's name is Sebastian Shaw, but just for shits and giggles, I'm just going to refer to him as Kevin Bacon. Kevin Bacon also has a telepathy-blocking helmet, which would then be snatched by Eric and used for his iconic helmet. Moira meets with Charles seeking advice on mutation, and she takes him and Raven to the CIA to convince the chief that Kevin Bacon is a threat. And this is not the same CIA that Ethan Hunt stole the Nautilus from in Mission Impossible. Now, I only reviewed 2 Mission Impossible films on this channel, and they are the first one and Dead Reckoning. I will review the other Mission Impossible films next year when we get the follow-up to Dead Reckoning, starting with Mission Impossible 2. But anyway, they convince the chief that mutants are real, and they are invited to a covert facility for mutants. Charles then tracks down Kevin Bacon, where Eric is attacking him. Kevin Bacon escapes, and Charles saves Eric from drowning. And the two of them quickly become friends. They become allies. They would eventually become enemies when they are portrayed by Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen. Charles and Eric then meet Hank McCoy, played by Nicholas Hoult. Nicholas Hoult would eventually be cast as Lex Luthor in James Gunn's Superman, which releases in July of 2025. I will be reviewing the Superman movies leading up to the new one. However, I will not be reviewing Man of Steel. Just 1978 Superman, Superman 2, Superman 3, Superman 4 The Quest for Peace, and Superman Returns. I've already reviewed my fair share of films from a failed franchise on this channel, like Black Adam, The Flush, and Blue Beetle. Hank McCoy, before he turned into a blue beast, has prehensile feet. Here we see that Hank built a prototype version of Cerebro, Charles' mutant fighting machine. They use Cerebro to recruit mutants to join their team to go up against Kevin Bacon. They find Alex Summers, as well as Angel Salvador, Banshee, and Darwin, a mutant with the ability of reactive evolution. His death at the hands of Kevin Bacon was met with some controversy from fans, critics, and even the actor who played him saying his powers should have made him immune to Kevin Bacon's powers. And it's an example of the cliche black guy dies first trope. During the recruitment scene, we get a brief cameo from Hugh Jackman in my absolute favorite scene in the entire movie.
Excuse me, I'm Eric Lensher.
Sounds Xavier.
Go fuck yourself.
The first F-bomb in the X-Men movies, but it certainly won't be the last.
Go fuck yourself, pretty boy.
Fuck off.
Who the fuck are you?
If you touch her, I will fucking kill you.
How fucked up are you?
I'm guessing Hugh Jackman telling Charles and Eric to go fuck themselves gave Fox the idea to create some R-rated X-Men movies in the future, like Deadpool, Logan, and Deadpool 2. And then we have Marvel Studios' Deadpool and Wolverine, in which the latest trailer pulled no fucking punches with the F-bombs and R-rated action. However, Deadpool and Wolverine is not the first Marvel Studios project to include F-bombs in any way, shape, or form, as Peter Quill tells Nebula to open the fucking door in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Kraven the Hunter is expected to be rated R, but that's a movie I had very low expectations for, after the dumpster fire known as Madam fucking Web. But anyway, back on to X-Men First Class. Charles, Eric, and Moira lead a CIA mission to the Soviet Union to capture Emma Frost. The Emma Frost diamond form prevents Charles from looking into her mind, so Eric cracks her skin, allowing Charles to look inside her mind, to find that Kevin Bacon intends to start World War III, triggering mutant ascendancy. Back at the facility, the newly recruited mutants show off their powers, much to Charles' chagrin, and that's where they come up with codenames, like Banshee, Havoc, Darwin, and Mystique. They even refer to Charles and Eric as Professor X and Magneto, respectively. That's how they got their names. I believe we learned how Cyclops and Storm got their codenames in X-Men Apocalypse, but I don't remember. More on that when it comes time for me to review X-Men Apocalypse. But we already know how Wolverine got his because we saw an absolutely shitty movie known as X-Men Origins Wolverine, in which Deadpool made me drink an entire bottle of aviation gin. But we won't be seeing Deadpool himself make a cameo again until probably my review of the Wolverine. But I know he'll be around for my reviews of Deadpool, Logan, and Deadpool 2. Afterwards, the facility is raided by Kevin Bacon and his band of mutants, in which they kill the human guards and leaving the mutants alive. Kevin Bacon asks the mutants to join him, in which Angel gladly does so. However, some of the other mutants disagree, and this is where we get the most controversial death scene in X-Men history, where Kevin Bacon kills Darwin. And in Moscow, a city I can't even say without thinking of a certain German disco song. Kevin Bacon compels the general to install missiles in Cuba, thus kicking off the Cuban Missile Crisis. Kevin Bacon even has his own submarine where he follows the Soviet fleet to ensure the missiles break a US blockade. Charles takes the mutants to his mansion in New York, where he trains them to control their abilities. They don't call themselves X-Men until the film's final act. There's even a scene where Charles convinces Eric to move a satellite dish while controlling his traumatic memories from the Holocaust, and his mother being killed by Kevin Bacon. However, Raven is conflicted about being in her natural blue form, until we get an iconic Michael Fassbender meme, in which Rebecca Romaine makes a brief uncredited cameo.
I want to go to bed. Maybe in a few years.
How about now?
I prefer the real Raven. I said the real Raven. Perfection.
Hank believes that Raven's DNA may provide a cure for his appearance as well as Raven's, but with a little convincing from Eric, Raven says no because she's not ashamed of being a mutant and being in her natural blue form. However, Hank tests the cure on himself, but unfortunately, it backfires and he turns into a blue monster. Again, I'm not a fan of his look in this movie. He looks nothing like Kelsey Grammer's take on Beast, but at the same time, I'm not sure why he went through a redesign in X-Men Days of Future Past. So now the X-Men have come together and are ready to take on Kevin Bacon. Hank, now going by the name Beast, serves as the pilot for the X-Men as they make their way over to Kevin Bacon's blockade line in Cuba to stop World War III from happening. This team of X-Men work very well off of each other, such as Charles and Banshee working together to use their mutant powers as a form of sonar to locate Kevin Bacon's submarine. However, this team of X-Men doesn't last very long, as a lot of mutants are killed off in Days of Future Past as part of mutant experimentation by Peter Dinklage. Charles uses his telepathic abilities to convince a Soviet officer to destroy the ship carrying the missiles. However, he can't use his abilities to control Kevin Bacon, or read Kevin Bacon's mind, since Kevin Bacon is wearing his telepathy-blocking helmet, which is then snatched by Eric as he becomes the villain that he would eventually become. Eric lifts Kevin Bacon's submarine out of the water and drops it on a nearby beach, and then he removes Kevin Bacon's helmet, allowing Charles to immobilize Kevin Bacon. But then, the unthinkable happens. Eric puts on the helmet, and he declares that he shares Kevin Bacon's view on mutants, but he does not forgive him for the death of his mother. And Charles is forced to experience the agonizing death of Kevin Bacon, as Eric uses his powers on the coin that he was forced to move at the beginning of the movie, and pushes it through Kevin Bacon's brain. Afterwards, both the US and Soviet fleets fire their missiles at the mutants on the beach, but Eric stops them. As he is about to send the missiles back to the ships, Moira tries to stop him by shooting at him, and the unthinkable happens yet again. Eric uses his abilities to deflect one of the bullets and hit Charles in the spine, thus paralyzing him, rendering him unable to walk, and he has to spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Eric goes after Moira, but Charles convinces him to stop, and while he's distracted, the missiles fall harmlessly into the ocean, and thus, Eric turns on the X-Men as he and Charles have different views on mutants, as they have always had when they were played by Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen. So Eric leaves with Angel, Azazel, Riptide, and even Raven, which he proudly recites to Charles, mutant and proud, and thus, Magneto has abandoned the X-Men to fight for his own cause. Charles, now using a wheelchair, returns to the mansion with the other mutants, where he intends to turn it into a school where young mutants can learn to control their abilities and fight for the greater good should the need arise. Moira promises never to reveal the location of the school, but once again, the unthinkable happens. He erases her memories after sharing a kiss with her. The same thing happened at the end of Superman 2, where Clark Kent erases Lois Lane's memories by kissing her. And in the final scene of the movie, Eric, now going by Magneto, breaks Emma Frost out of her prison cell. Even though that's the last we see of her as she dies prior to the events of Days of Future Past. And that's the end of the movie. I'm giving X-Men First Class a 9 out of 10. It was definitely a breath of fresh air after the disaster known as X-Men Origins Wolverine. With X-Men Origins Wolverine, absolutely zero effort was put into it whatsoever. But here, they tell a great story with the same characters you know and love, but are played by a younger cast, who all did an excellent job, especially James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender as our main leads. X-Men First Class is one of my personal favorite X-Men movies, aside from X2, The Wolverine, Days of Future Past, and Logan. Deadpool is an entirely different category altogether, although the first two Deadpool movies are part of the X-Men universe. But yeah, I love the new cast, the direction, the screenplay that doesn't contain any cheesy dialogue like, "Do you know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning?" The same thing that happens to everything else. Seriously, fuck that line! The musical score was great, and the visual effects were top-notch. A great improvement over the garbage CGI of X-Men Origins Wolverine. The success of this film led to more films focusing on the younger X-Men cast, like X-Men Days of Future Past, X-Men Apocalypse, and Dark Phoenix. And then, we had 2 more Wolverine movies and the first 2 Deadpool movies. And then, Fox's failed attempt to reboot the Fantastic Four in 2015. Now, 2025's The Fantastic Four I'm looking forward to, especially Pedro Pascal as Mr. Fantastic, Vanessa Kirby as the Invisible Woman, Joseph Quinn as the Human Torch, and Ebon Moss-Backrack as the Thing. Now, the other Fantastic Four movies I will be reviewing on my channel next year, including the 2015 film that I've so rightfully dubbed Fan Fuck Up 4. And I already know what score I'm giving that movie! But yes, X-Men First Class is one of my personal favorite X-Men movies. It has every right to be. I loved everything about this movie, from Hugh Jackman's brief cameo to the new cast, and everything else in between. But next up is another one of my personal favorites. Stay tuned for my upcoming review of The Wolverine coming soon. Till then, I'll see you all next time.